Come on into the Terracotta room with me, Dara, for a deeper dive today with Beth Matuga, political consultant for Democrats. She is a hoot and a holler, You will not want to miss this one, trust me.
The institution of political parties, broadly speaking, writ large, is very important for our country in a way that is protective and in a way, most importantly, that is moderative.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. You can hear it in my voice because, I am very giddy, very excited to have with me in the Terracotta room, live and in person, Beth Matuga. She is a Democratic consultant extraordinaire. And let me tell you, you folks down in Pembroke Pines maybe don't know who Beth is for the name recognition, but anybody who's anybody in the process knows Beth. She is an A-list guest. She's got a really upbeat personality, and she is a badass. So welcome to A Deeper Dive.
Geez, thank you. That you're setting me up for failure here, Dara. That was really nice, though. I appreciate it. Thank you. And shout out to my folks in Pembroke Pines.
Sorry, why did I say Pembroke? All right, I don't know. All right, I could have said fill in the blank. Seminole. How about that?
I've actually spent quite a deal of time and money in Seminole County, but sure.
Okay. I take it back.
No, it's okay.
I love you, Pembroke Pines,
Yeah,
anyways. I grew
Seminole
up in
County.
Hollywood Beach. So.
Okay, good. Very kind introduction. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Beth knows a lot about what's going on in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. She is a consultant, as I said, for Democrats, and she also has spent a lot of time as a fundraiser for Democratic candidates. So we're going to dig right into it with Beth. We are recording this the day after the March primary elections. Indeed. So this will come out on Sunday, but we're recording it on a Wednesday. So, I got emails from the Republican Party of Florida and the Democratic Party of Florida, and I guess they're called the Florida Democratic Party.
They are.
Yes. But they're both claiming victory from last night. So what are let's dig right in. What's your takeaways?
Well, my takeaways are, I come at this from mostly state legislative politics in the last 20-ish years. And so, my great hope, and I think the hope of the FDP, of the Florida Democratic Party and Chair Freed, is that we're showing some signs of life in Florida. Because
let me just interrupt you, because
sure.
the what we're talking about are mostly municipal elections from yesterday.
And so, we did have some signs of life, and we have had, I think, what's a nice little sort of narrative building particularly in the off year, starting this last off year, with Mayor Deegan's election in Jacksonville, which was
a
pretty big shot in the arm.
Yeah.
And then Tom Keene's special election victory in House District 35 in Orange and Osceola counties. And that's, I think, created a nice little narrative arc, in addition to what went on last night, that when Democrats compete unmoored from the top of the ticket, we can win. And we can win being outspent, 2-1, 2.5-1. And that I hope what we see trending and what we saw very clearly, particularly in Tom Keene's race in Central Florida, continues, which is, I think that there is a section of the electorate, lots of NPAs and some GOP voters who are finally fed up with, the craziness, the extremism, the dismantling of our public infrastructure, and maybe finally ready to vote accordingly. I hope.
I think you maybe got a taste of that yesterday with I think Donald Trump obviously overwhelmingly winning in the presidential preference primary, but about 18%, I think is the number I saw, of Republicans voted for someone else. Like they didn't not vote, they voted for someone else.
Yeah.
So that's like, a fifth of the Republican base who's come out for those elections.
Yeah.
It will be interesting to see where they,
Where
Florida's
they
a
settle.
different,
Yeah.
Florida's a different cat. So
Certainly is.
I don't think you're going to call Florida going for President Biden in November, are you?
I don't like to make calls.
Oh, darn,
But
because I love to.
I'm very frequently wrong.
Yeah.
Look, I think that if the tide really is turning here, that there are some indicators, right? In fact, I was reading recently an article about whether special election victories, like the couple that I just described, have any, portend anything for November general elections. And there is a statistical tie, or not a tie, but a statistical indication,
Right.
that, one party overperforming in off-year elections does seem to indicate something going into November. And so, yeah, if a fifth of people, of Trump voters, have decided that we'll take anyone else but him, I do think that certainly says something. I hope people are exasperated. It's time to be exasperated. This is crazy. If this man's reelected, this may be our last free and fair election that people don't actually think was stolen. And I find that terrifying. I find that prospect utterly terrifying.
The whole election denialism that so many Republicans who you and I know personally,
Yeah.
that they will not stand up and say President
Joe Biden was elected, duly elected.
Yeah. I mean, it is, to me, it's still jaw-dropping to me, and I'm crusty and I'm cynical and I'm but that I still find to be that's still not, it doesn't baffle me, but it still gets to me because it is such a fundamental component of how our governance works, of the basis of the foundation of our democracy.
Our democracy relies on institutions. And I say a lot that I'm an institutionalist, and not because I belong in an institution, although I probably do. But
this is why she's an A-lister.
Thank you. I'm big about institutions because institutions are the protector, are the prophylactic against the insanity that we're experiencing right now. And when you have a president and a government, a federal government, intent on destroying those institutions from the inside, they can't protect the public anymore. And I think a lot about how much damage was done during the what I hope was the first and only Trump presidency to those institutions. I think about the DOJ. I think about the uncertainty surrounding the Secret Service's involvement in January 6th.
Right.
And institutions matter. Institutions are made of people. And I think we're in greater peril than anyone knows concerning the level of protection that our institutions are able to afford us when they are under siege.
Right, especially because now we know the Russians are manipulating the elections. The Chinese are probably too. So, we know there are foreign entities that are dabbling in our elections. And so if we don't trust if Americans don't trust our institutions, as you say, it makes them sort of ripe for the pickings for bad actors.
It does. And, if the other, going back to the election denialism, if nothing's real, then nothing's real. If there's not a certain shared baseline reality, you can make people believe anything. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with the election denialism, right? I'll also say that if Democrats could rig elections, I would have been rigging elections for years. Like, if we were actually able to carry out that sophisticated an operation, I probably would not be sitting here in this podcast right now. But I always get a kick out of that when we're accused of this incredibly coherent, competent election rigging scheme.
Yeah.
If we were able to do that, we'd probably just go out and win more elections.
You wouldn't be swimming upstream all the time.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm wondering if this is part of what your discussions are like when you're talking to potential donors. I mean, it seems really kind of high and lofty and deep that, this is, and we hear this. I mean, I remember Marco Rubio years ago in whatever race he was running for before, I think even when he was running for the U.S. Senate, saying, this can go on our list of, level the playing field, the things you hear during the session. Like, this is the election that's going to determine the heart and soul of the country.
It's weird how every single one of those is like that.
I know, but I feel like this one really.
It really is. It's really this one, yeah.
But I mean, how much does this level of concern? How much does it play into or is it a part of your conversations with donors?
So it frequently is the answer. Obviously, Democratic donors, ideological Democratic donors, are very concerned about this, and I think I think that one of the reasons that we have shown a few signs of life is because people really are coming to the conclusion that if we don't do something, this whole fun democracy experiment might come to a not so fun end. And so, these large Democratic ideological donors are concerned about this, and they're concerned about Florida because up until recently we were considered a pretty big flip state, a pretty big swing state. And I think that we still are a little bit, and I think that when people are motivated to give, everybody has a unique donor motivation, right? And there's not one donor motivation that is better or more justified than one or the other, right? And so I try very hard not to think about donors based solely on that or whether their motivation is right or wrong or good or bad. But I will say that if you are motivated to give to Democrats because of this impending, sense of maybe the democracy,
the decline of American democracy.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a fun way to put that. If you're motivated to give because of that, good. Like, we should all be screaming our heads off right now. We should all be terrified.
Right.
And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
But if it's like, we need more solar energy, that's fine too.
That's fine too. Yeah, sure. Love solar. But everybody's donor motivation is different. And sometimes it's purely transactional. Sometimes it's, I want to save the turtles and this candidate wants to save the turtles. But surely, yes, there are donors who are now motivated based solely upon what you and I have been discussing.
What are you hearing most when you're having conversations with potential donors?
Well, so obviously I concentrate a lot on state legislative races.
Yes.
And we talk a lot about the both chambers now being in the super minority.
See, this is, again, my listeners are going to hear it and they're going to know, like, oh, here she goes again, because she's so great that her guest is answering the questions before she asks them.
You are prescient. You are prescient.
I thought you were going to say precious.
Also that too. So we talk a lot about the super minority in both chambers of the state legislature. Right. And it's bad. Listen, it's not a good thing.
Got to make your job harder.
It does. But, last decade when I was doing state Senate races, I started when we were in a super minority. I started when we had 12 members. And when I was done, we had 17. So 17 is more than 12. But it is procedurally very bad for the state legislature, right? Because A 2/3 majority in either chamber can waive the rules.
Yeah.
It hamstrings Democrats' ability to make really bad bills less bad. Mm-hmm. It hamstrings Democrats' ability to debate, to amend, to speak on bills, to have our voices heard. And these people are duly elected by the citizens of the state of Florida. And they deserve to have these people in Tallahassee speak on these things.
Right.
And so procedurally, it's bad. It's bad for the state. It's bad for the citizens. And it's also happens to be bad for all the folks who work in this process. I hear this from lobbyists all the time, that nobody likes a super majority situation. Nobody likes that. Everybody makes more money when these numbers are closer. Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so
when you're having to fight for something or against
indeed.
something.
Well, and it also allows you when the numbers are a little bit closer to, maybe get a couple votes that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Sure.
It gives people cover to vote maybe a little bit more moderately than they otherwise would. It allows, coalition building in a way that we don't have the ability to do now. And so everybody, it's better for everyone, except maybe the governor, to get out of the super minority situation in both chambers. And so I really believe that we have an opportunity to do that this cycle. And
do you?
I do.
You are raising money for
I'm the general consultant for the.
I'm sorry, you're the consultant.
It's called the FHDCC. So it's a kind of a mouthful. It's the
Florida House Democratic.
Two more campaign committee.
Campaign committee.
Good job. So we're an affiliated party committee, which is a pretty unique construction, actually. A couple years back, the Republicans were having a little bit of infighting over at the RPOF, as they.
And we're looking at the husk of
It's quite a building.
It is.
I mean,
literally looking at the husk of the George W. Bush or whatever center there.
I got to tell you though, Dara, those who live in glass houses cannot throw stones. It's not like our office building is. It's fantastic.
You don't have
so we have an office out of the FDP,
right.
And it's much smaller than the George W. Bush building,
right.
But it's very nice, and great credit to a couple chairs back. We bought that building, and so we have land. We have
the one
property.
over on the one-way street. I thought
no, that's the old. So that's the one that's made of asbestos and tears.
Oh, gee.
So
okay, all right, wait.
Thank you. I'll be here all week. Tip your waitresses. The old building on Bruno, I spent essentially all of my 30s in.
Yeah.
Sobbing uncontrollably. And so they, a couple years back, I think it was Chair Rizzo, when Chair Rizzo was party chair. I actually made, I think, what was a really good decision and bought a floor in the Exchange building. Right. For those not in Tallahassee, that's one of our skyscrapers. It's I think 5 stories tall, very large building in Tallahassee.
Yeah,
so,
in downtown Tallahassee.
And so it's haunted, by the way, and that's a fun aspect of it. That having been said, it is certainly not the grand.
Is that the old federal building near the library?
No, it's right on the corner of College and Monroe, directly across from the Florida Realtors.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I know exactly.
Yeah.
And it's haunted. And so now we are going to have to take a little trip.
Sidebar.
Yeah. What evidence do you have that it is haunted?
Well,
or is it just something that you feel in your bones?
I personally do not feel it in my bones.
Okay.
Because ghosts, let's be honest, ghosts are not real. Okay. So I'm sorry for everyone listening, but this is not a real thing.
Yeah.
The lore of the building is that it is haunted by a man who I am told was, and I might be telling a story because I'm telling this fourth hand, by a man named Cincinnatus, who was a banker during the I think surrounding the Great Depression, and hung himself when the bottom fell out of the economy, and he had lost people their life savings and whatnot. And so the lore, the tale is that Cincinnatus haunts the Exchange building ever since.
And
Dun,
hope.
dun, dun.
Really, I don't have that.
You have like a creaky
I
door
don't.
sound.
I have this.
I don't. I don't know if that quite fits, but it certainly adds a little flair. I like that. That's good.
Okay, well, we hope that the haunting of the building does not have a. We hope that that is not correlated with the results.
I don't think it is, again, because it's not, the ghosts aren't real. But so to bring this in for a landing.
Yes, she's good. She's following the thread. I went all the way around.
I can be taught. But yeah, we don't have a nice big fun building like that. Anyway, this is.
You were talking about the party
and the structure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
which was another which was another question I was going to ask.
Yeah. So and it's very opaque. Like if you don't know these, crazy, campaign finance laws, it all looks very weird and messy. But so a couple years back, the RPOF was having a little infighting. The state legislature created in statute what's called an affiliated party committee, and it is essentially an arm. It's an arm of the state party that is separate from the state party, that has all the rights and privileges of the state party, all the powers imbued in a state party. So now all four caucuses, so the Florida Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, the House Republicans, the Senate Democrats, and the House Democrats all have their own affiliated party committee.
So let's, this was one of my questions, because our listeners are really sophisticated and they're into the process. Have the state parties outlived their usefulness in Florida at this point?
So you've asked my life quest question is what you've asked. No, state parties are vital.
I mean, they kind of were laundromats at some point, right?
Sure.
With a good Rolodex for people who don't know what a Rolodex is.
So let's talk broadly though.
Yeah.
This is an institution. Parties are an institution.
Good point.
Yeah. And so a lot of the way people have a very strange sometimes conception of parties, particularly state parties, that they're a thing, that they're a specific construct, but they're not. State parties are people. Parties are elected officials, and Leader Driscoll tells our members all the time, if you have a complaint about the party or you want the party to do something, you are the party. You are the state party. And the other thing I normally tell my students is that parties are only what we fund them to be. There's no, secret reserve of money that parties use to carry out elections or do things. Like, the money that we raise into the party is what the party is. And if we fund it to do certain things, it can do those things. But if we don't fund it, it can't. And so the institution of political parties, broadly speaking, writ large, is very important for our country in a way that is protective and in a way, most importantly, that is moderative. It's kind of counterintuitive, but party entities moderate our politics, right? Because
unless they get hijacked by...
Well, and so this is why institutions matter. This is why strong institutions matter, because there's a great argument to be made that if the Republican Party was a little bit stronger, that they would have moderated, they would have self-moderated, and maybe Donald Trump would not have been as powerful as he was. And so, that to me is the great value of strong parties, is that it is a moderative influence on our body politic. And when you have weak parties, you see what we get.
So what do you have happening here when you have the voter registration? So the Division of Elections shows the state has 5.2 million Republicans, about 4.4 million Democrats, and close to 3.9 million NPAs. It's like a third, and a third, has kind of been like that for some time, but the Democrats were always up here and the Republicans. So what does it say about the structure, the moderating influence of the parties that... Okay, she's ready to answer. I'll stop asking.
No.
Okay.
It's because I do get this question a
I'm
lot,
sure
too.
you do.
Yeah.
Because the gap keeps growing.
The gap keeps growing. And listen, we can argue until we're blue in the face about why.
Right.
And I think you and Steve Shale, my good friend, had some conversations about this on his podcast. Your podcast with him. There's ancestral Democrats who were always Republicans who are now registering as Republicans. That's part of it. Not a huge part of it, but it's part of it. You have people moving into the state who are more conservative than the people who used to be moving into the state. That's certainly part of it. So again, we can argue about why this is happening, but there's only really one way to fix it, and it's partisan voter registration. And this is part of, you have to fund the party to do things. And so the Republicans have made what I think is a very strategic and very, quite honestly, effective effort at discouraging people to register to vote. They make it harder to vote and to register to vote. In fact, the most recent changes in voter registration forms, kicking people off the VBM rolls, the vote by mail rolls every 2 years, all of those. We talk a lot about, well, why can't we register more Democrats to vote? Because it's harder. It's harder and more expensive. And when you're already at a financial disadvantage and being outspent 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1 in these races, it is a tough decision to make. That no, we're going to set aside this money to go register or re-enroll folks in vote by mail.
I think part of it too, and Steve mentioned this, is that you've got all these different food groups now that are engaged in voter registration, and they're getting grants, and it's become a cottage industry.
Yeah.
And so how effective they are, we're seeing some of that right now with these numbers.
Sure. And so
I'm not pointing the fingers at anybody in particular.
And nor am I, but it's funding stream fragmentation, right? If you typically have one pot of money that's being directed and then you chop it up into a bunch of little different pots, it becomes more difficult. There's more cooks in the kitchen, certainly. But I think what's being lost in this discussion is that this has been engineered by Republicans. It is not an accident that, are they doing more Republican voter registration? Probably. But they've also made it, again, using an institution, which is the state government, have made it materially more difficult for people in this state to vote. And when you control all the levers of government, that's a very effective thing to do.
When you make it more difficult to register through the mechanisms that mainly Democrats use to register.
That's right.
When you make it more difficult to vote in the way that mainly Democrats cast their ballots. So they are targeted, the argument is targeting these types of voting behaviors, and then it takes some time for voters. The data I've seen says, it takes some number of cycles for voters to get used to the new, whatever the changes are, the restrictions are. And we are changing these things so rapidly, there isn't really, the learning curve doesn't have time to settle.
Of course. And most voters are not weirdos like you and me, right? Most voters are not like these bizarre political animals who know exactly when the VBM mail drops.
Right.
Nobody knows that in the way that we do. And you can't expect voters to have that level of insight into our voting laws. And so, listen, Republicans have done a great job at this. I give them great credit. They are smart, and they have really cracked the code on voter suppression. Turns out it works. Who knew?
Republicans are good at framing the narrative on a lot of things.
Indeed.
And what do you think the biggest challenge facing the Democrats going into the 2024 election is, and what's the biggest advantage? I'll tell you what my answer is in a minute.
Biggest disadvantage, as it has been for most of my career, is money.
Yeah.
There is sort of a breathless wait and see about whether the Biden campaign will make a significant investment in Florida. And so we still remain really hopeful, and we're working very hard those of you listening in DC and nationally, we're working very hard down here. And I think
we are here. We are here. We are here.
Can you hear me breathing? We're alive.
It's like Horton hears a who.
That's right. But I think that I understand the mechanisms behind this. I've been doing this long enough, and my background is in fundraising, so I understand making important monetary decisions, and I understand that Florida is really expensive. I get it, and I know that when you are, we have to do this when we're running House races and state legislative races. You have to look at the broad map, and you have to make wise investments. And I understand that when you look at Florida, listen, you can come to Florida and spend $10 million, and no one knows you even exist. $10 million is a drop in the bucket in Florida, right? And $10 million in other states, in a state like
$10 million is like a Senate race, a state Senate race now.
Exactly. And so that is a drop in the bucket in Florida, but $10 million in other places is an awful lot of money. So I understand the calculus.
The ROI.
Exactly. And, and the Biden campaign was right once before that they could win without Florida, and they did. And so it's kind of hard to argue with that logic, but here's what I'll say. Long term, for the good of the country, we need Florida's electoral votes. I don't know that there's no one comes to mind of someone who could reassemble a coalition in the way that President Biden did to win the presidency without Florida. And I worry long term because the inattention compounds on itself, right? And what do I mean by that? The direct result of what happened of the Biden administration or of the campaign not investing as presidential campaigns usually do, the direct result that we saw was a complete cratering of turnout in the subsequent midterm. And and if we go 8 years without that significant investment, I don't think anybody understands what long-term damage that is doing to the Florida electorate.
That's interesting.
And that is a I hope people nationally are considering that, which is, it's not just for this cycle, guys. It's for a very long time.
We'll be right back with Beth Matuga. But before we jump back into it, I want to remind you all, Deeper Divas, we want to hear from you. Please do send us an email to podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. That's podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. But the threat of Donald Trump for Democrats, is it so great that they can't see past that?
Well, there's folks much smarter than I making these decisions.
Okay,
right?
all right.
And
I'm just,
and sure, I mean, it's an imminent threat. And quite candidly, if I were in charge and I was looking at, do we stop Donald Trump or do we abandon Florida? I don't know what decision that I would make, because talk about a hostage situation, do you shoot the hostage?
Right.
So I'm glad I'm not the one that has to make that decision, because it's tough.
What about other than the Biden campaign? We've heard a lot about, there's been stories being written now for several years. Like, I saw a story the other day, like, Florida now decidedly red. And I thought, like, where have you been for the past,
We who have been here feel it feels very red.
Yeah, it's just, sure. I just always chuckle when I see these stories. But what about other big donors, other than the actual Biden campaign and the super PACs and whatever? I mean, have they written off Florida too, or do you think we're going to see some movement there?
I think we'll see a little bit of movement. We don't know yet because those folks traditionally invest a little bit later, right? And very wisely, frequently kind of wait to see how things settle. I think again the imminent threat of not only a Trump presidency, a potential Trump presidency, but the recognition that there's, it is quickly becoming more difficult to make the claim that Florida is a swing state, to make the claim that Florida is purple. And once that narrative takes hold, it's going to be really hard to roll that back, right? And so, listen, for all you donors out there, please, if you're as terrified about that as I am, give me a call.
I mean, we're talking about the 2024 elections. We're recording this now. The Supreme Court's opinions come out tomorrow. Everybody's breathlessly waiting for the rulings on the proposed amendments on the marijuana and the abortion. I personally don't think the recreational marijuana is going to be is going to have a noticeable effect on voter turnout in November. That's just me personally.
I think you're probably right.
And I think that the abortion proposal could. Do you think I'm right on that?
Broadly speaking, so I've run ballot initiatives before.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, well, first let me say two things. This is a great example of Republicans being very good at using levers of government to put impediments in place to people either voting or having their vote heard or having their say heard. It used to be that ballot initiatives only needed 50% plus one to pass. And that made great sense to everyone, right? Majority of people want it. Let's go ahead and do it. Thank you, Governor Askew, for putting that system in place. And now it's 60%.
Yes.
And we've had proposals to increase it to 66.7%.
Right. 2/3.
Yeah, 2/3 majority.
Right. Which would basically
preclude anyone from ever passing a ballot initiative.
Yeah.
Because if you can get 2/3 of the citizens of the state of Florida to agree on anything, I shall eat my shoe.
Yeah.
And
they're very fine shoes, by the way.
Thank you. They're Rothy's. Rothy's, please send me some free shoes.
Rothy's.
Yeah,
hey, Rothy's.
Good, thank you. Now accepting sponsorships.
So is Deeper Dive, Rothy's.
They're great, aren't they?
Yeah, I haven't tried them yet.
Oh, you need to. So they're made with recycled water bottles.
Yeah.
So you can feel really good about that.
Yeah.
The biggest benefit that they have, in my estimation, aside from the fact that they're all flats and I don't wear heels because I'm already tall enough, and also why torture myself?
I love you for that.
I'm already a woman in this process. Like, it's already bad enough. I don't need to put torture devices on my feet every day and trot around. Anyway.
And then have to end up having surgery because in 20 years because you've been cramming your feet into shoes.
Teeny tiny shoes.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I'm glad we've gone down this road. The coolest thing about them is that they're machine washable.
Oh, I need to try them.
And so, when women's shoes crusty, but it's a really good pair of shoes and you want to keep it, but you're like, ooh, they're I got to get rid of them because they're crusty. I literally come back from a trip and throw
them in the washing.
Yeah, jump all the contents of my suitcase into the washing machine. It's delightful.
I have seen them and I get the ads and I snooped around on them enough that I still keep getting the ads even though I haven't bought them yet. Yeah. So I'm going to have to try them because I'm sitting here in my Vans. I am now solely sneakers because after I fractured my tibia, I just do not if it's off the ground, unless it's a platform, and
fight the power, Dara. Don't let big high heel get you. Don't cave.
Don't worry.
Okay, good.
Remember Alex Sink running in heels?
Do I remember?
Was that Alex Sink or was that was a campaign that there was a women's, all right, you had to have been in the process by then.
I'm sure I was.
Running in heels, was it Hillary Clinton?
Is this the women have to do everything men do except backwards and in high heels?
it was a little pin they wore, running in heels.
I
It
have
was
no
a
memory
thing.
of this, but to be fair, Dara, like I've tried really hard to block out a lot of the last 20 years. So who knows?
It's gotta be kind of like a lingering trauma from,
Oh, it 100%.
I've
is.
been at those election night.
Yeah, it's rough. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
People ask me a lot. Like, I've been doing this for 23 years, and I've literally never done anything else. I started working in a lobbying firm the first year that I was an undergrad at FSU.
I didn't even know you ever worked in a lobbying firm.
I did. I managed a couple of lobbying firms, and that's kind of how my very early career got started, in college and right out of college. And people ask me all the time, like, why do you keep doing this? And aside from the fact that I have no other marketable skills, I'm a true believer. I hate to say it. I really honestly believe in what I do and the people that I work for, and that Democrats are better for the state and better for people. And when my head hits a pillow at night, I lie there and stare at the ceiling normally for an hour, contemplating all of my bad choices. But I also know that I did something to try to make it better. And when you're a person who believes in institutions, when you're a person who really believes that what you're doing is better for people's lives, when my head hits a pillow at night, I say to myself, well, I tried. At least I tried.
Well, you've accomplished a lot too. I mean, if you brought the Dems from 12 to 17, that was in the Senate.
Sure, that's a bigger number rather than a smaller number. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, listen, there certainly have been bright spots. And
So one of the things that I was also asking is, so the disadvantage going into 2024.
Back to your actual question.
Yeah, well, I had to
we
go
have taken a
look at-
ride here,
I
Dara.
love
We've
it.
gone from ballot initiative to Rothy's to
Yeah.
my life story to
No,
my
I
tale
love.
of woe.
It's not a tale of woe. You're awesome. What's their advantage going into 2024?
Money, which is, I think, how I...
No, Democrats.
Oh, what's our advantage?
Yeah.
Well, people like us better, I think, now. I
See,
think,
I started to say Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I feel like
guess.
that's your biggest advantage and your biggest disadvantage.
Yeah, it's listen, I don't...
People like us more. I like that.
Well,
That's a good answer.
I think what I said at the top of the podcast, I think still stands, which is I think people are finally maybe have been pushed too far. Maybe they're finally fed up. Listen, property insurance and abortion, those two issues that we identified early on in the special election in Tom Keene's race in Central Florida in his House special election, they're not going to get any better for Republicans in Florida, right? Those two issues are whether or not the ballot amendment, the initiative ends up on the ballot or not, people are going to talk about it either way. Property insurance has, contrary to popular belief, not been fixed.
No.
and will not be fixed for a great while, and certainly not before the November election. If a large storm hits the state of Florida, we have real big property insurance problems.
Sure.
So I think Democrats rarely have a pocketbook issue and a social issue of that salience simultaneously. And we've got them both in Florida this cycle. And so that makes me, again, I've been doing this for 23 years, and I have never seen two issues poll consistently with such intensity. And the two of them combined is dynamite.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we saw this again in the Keene race, where that, it's great to get some GOP crossover vote, and it's great to persuade NPAs, but that's all we talked about in that race. That was the two issues that we sent, mail, TV. That's all we said: property insurance and abortion, over and over and over again. And it worked. That's how you persuade persuadable voters. And I think that is the secret sauce for us this cycle. I really do.
That's interesting. And so you think that, so what parts of the state do you think that like should Democrats be targeting right now?
Well, I can talk a little bit about, the areas of the state house map, at least, are where we're looking are almost entirely in Central and South Florida. And that's,
Sure.
No great surprise.
That's where the Keene race
That's
that
right.
you're talking about.
Orange and Osceola.
That's right.
And so, it's no great surprise that our concentration of voters is in that area. And there's some very swingy seats. The latest redistricting for the legislative maps, made it such that some of these seats are reconfigured and they're gerrymandered just enough. And this is also a great example of Republicans using institutions to solidify their power, which is, they know how to draw maps. They're really good at map drawing. And I give them...
Yeah, elections matter.
I give them great credit.
They're really good at that.
They're really good at drawing those maps. And so, Central Florida and South Florida is where I think that we have a great opportunity. I think we got a big problem in parts of Miami-Dade that I'm not exactly sure how we're going to address.
Like the 305 is that, there's so much weirdness going on down there.
Yeah. Florida
it's kind of delicious in a way.
It is.
But
Florida in general.
I need like a flow chart to keep track of who's indicted and who.
Yeah, it's a wild state. It's a wild area of a wild state. And when I tell, if we're on, trips outside the state, and I'll say, work in politics in Florida, people are always like, Florida, because we're just a bunch of stone cold weirdos.
We are.
And what's that saying? All the nuts roll downhill to Florida.
I never heard that saying.
Yeah. So it's like living in a Carl Hiaasen novel every day. And there are places in this state that are very strange. But I sure do love it here.
Well, that whole socialism thing that they started using,
it worked
down in Miami. It did work. The two Democrats, Donna Shalala and Debbie McCarcel. I always screw up the pronunciation.
We just say DMP. It's a lot.
DMP, who is now running against Rick Scott
for United States Senate. Yeah.
For U.S. Senate. But that's how they flipped those seats.
Indeed, and I feel like I've done nothing on this podcast but say great credit to the Republicans. But we had no inoculation again. Like, we didn't know coherently what to do about that, and it worked. This is again another one of our weaknesses as Democrats, which is that if we just explain to voters, like if we just say the right things, if we just have a 14-point plan and a flow chart and a graph, and if we're better, and if we just tell voters and explain enough to them, they'll finally get it and they'll vote for us. And I don't know, it's probably not exactly right. And I think Republicans are very much better at appealing to the emotional side of voters in the voting process. And so it's very easy to scream at the top of your lungs that Democrats are socialists, but it's not so easy for the Democrat to say, how do you define socialism?
Yeah,
Talk to me about what is your political theory on socialism, right? And it's a really tough place to be. It's a structural issue that, at least in Florida, I don't think that we have solved.
No, it's on the back foot and responding, because they're framing the narrative in very frightening and pithy and effective ways, particularly in the Hispanic community, in the 305. And you when you're caught on the back foot like that, you're constantly having to, I think you you start at a disadvantage when the narrative is set by the other side.
Sure, 100%. And, this is also part of just...
Whether it's true or not.
Sure. And, yeah, and frequently it's not. But this is part of our challenge as a big tent party, right? As Democrats, we are a coalition party. We have a lot of constituent parts that make up the whole, and those constituent parts are not homogenous. And as a result, we have a sort of bottom-up structure as Democrats. And if you think of it as a pyramid, right, the Republicans' pyramid is inverted. They have a top-down structure. They're much more homogenous. Their messages can be simpler. Their, voters are, because of their similarity, are easier to mobilize and speak to. And, we have groups within groups within groups.
Yeah, there's
on the Democratic side, and that is a structural issue that is never going to change. Number one, because we want all of these groups, right? That is the point of being a Democrat, which is you come together and you find a common ground and you figure out what's best for everyone, and people have differing opinions about that. And so there's an inherent structural challenge in being a Democrat that just doesn't exist for Republicans. And that's not an excuse, because it's also our greatest strength. And that part is sometimes manifests itself in tough ways.
Yeah, because you've got, and I know you need to run, and we need to talk about dating apps before we finish. We will finish with that. But you've got progressives now, you had this split really over nationally and even within Florida over on a very micro scale over Israel and Palestine. And, that's just an example of this progressive, wing of the party. You have progressives like Maxwell Frost get elected. But in Florida, do you think that the Democrats need to be statewide, not in the individual seats? Is there a way for them to shift to the center? Would that help, or do they need to go all in and go all the way to the edge? Do you know what I mean? Is that a real question?
I don't know that it's a binary choice. We should be better at doing two things or three things at once, right? Like I don't think it's option A or option B only. I think that there is a blended approach, and we're a big tent party. There should be room enough for everyone. Does it make it harder frequently? Yeah, of course it does. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm a pretty moderate person, right? I have worked for just about every kind of Democrat that you can imagine.
Right.
And the sort of purity tests I don't think are helpful, right? I don't think that the purity, I don't think asking one question and then assessing whether a person is a Democrat or not based on one question is necessarily a great way to operate. There is a place for moderates in this country. I started, my career working for one of the more moderate members of Congress, Alan Boyd, and that was during a period of time.
I got in a huge argument about abortion with him 40 years ago.
40 years ago?
30 years ago.
Right. Well,
30 years ago.
So, when I was coming up in this process, he was a very powerful member of the Blue Dog Coalition.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously they kind of are now a little bit more resurgent, the Blue Dogs. They went through a pretty rough time when Congressman Boyd was finally defeated in 2010 during the crazy Tea Party time, right?
That was Steve Sutherland.
Was that Steve Sutherland? That's right. Good memory. And I think people forget that the reason that we have the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is because of the Blue Dogs. And I don't think I've ever been prouder than the vote that Alan Boyd took on the floor of Congress, voting yes to get that thing passed. I believe it passed by one vote. And he knew, we told him, he knew that if he voted yes on it, he would not be a United States congressman the next cycle. And he did it anyway. And he said, I have government-run health care. I'm a veteran. Everyone should have the same opportunity to have the same kind of health care that I do. And so I think that is a great example of a place where moderates did us a great service as a country. And we can do that again. We have to be able, again, we have to decide, are we a big tent party or not? Is there room enough for everyone or not? And there is. There is.
Last serious question.
I'm ready.
Who's going to win in November, not in Florida, President Biden or President Trump?
The the cynical side of me says that President Trump may prevail. The hopeful side of me says that President Biden will prevail. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm loath to call it one way or another. Every day I wake up feeling a little bit different. Every day I think, something happens. I think, okay, this is the sign. President Biden's going to do it. And then I'll wake up a different day and, I'll see something on Twitter and I'll go, God damn it.
Right.
Come on. So I don't know.
Well, you teaching this semester?
I am. Yeah.
So what's the level of enthusiasm among young people?
Well, you have to understand that I teach in a very specialized program, right? And those kids are enthusiastic no matter what happens.
That's
right?
true. So they're not. It's not a good bellwether.
I teach in a program called it's a mouthful, Masters of Applied American Politics and Policy. It is my 17th year teaching.
Wow, I didn't realize you'd been teaching that long.
Press the applause, the hooray button. I really like that button.
Anyhow, I know, you deserve it.
Thank you. And I love it. I love it. It is satisfying in a way that my day job is not.
Right.
And I don't have children, and so I call these are my kids. And it's a very specialized, applicative graduate program for people who want to do this for a living. Despite, again, my personal tale of woe, I do try to encourage that because this is an institution, right? Our political operatives, our consultant class is an institution, and you can work to make it better, and you can produce better operatives, better staffers, better consultants. I like to say that the MAP program is literally a good government factory. We make people better at government by producing higher quality, more educated, more motivated, more driven operatives, consultants, potential candidates. And that's an important service. And so, people sometimes look askance at what we do for a living. And in fact, 23 years, I still don't think my parents understand what I do for a living.
Right.
But it's important. It's important that good people do these things. And that people with good motivations do these things, and people who are trained to do them do these things. And so I really truly believe that the 17 years I've spent teaching has not only been personally very fulfilling and getting to watch, these kids grow up and go off and do amazing things. And quite candidly, it's sometimes a little embarrassing when I walk into a lobbyist's office and I have to ask a former student for money. That's great fun. But I believe in the program. So it's been personally, but
I'm glad you got to talk about it.
Yeah. It's been professionally, again, rewarding, personally rewarding, but I believe that what we're doing is improving the quality of our politics.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I was going to ask you, politics is like a rock and roll kind of lifestyle. And then
is that what I've been doing?
I feel like it's kind of rock and roll. I mean, you heard about, the girls on the bus or whatever.
Girls on the bus. What are the girls on the bus?
I mean, isn't that stuff that happens on the bus? People hook up.
Oh, I try.
Didn't there used to be campaign buses?
I try to avoid hooking up on buses.
Okay, so we're not hooking up on buses, but maybe there are other ways to hook up.
There are. Good segue. I think you may be referring to online dating.
Yeah.
Which I am encouraging you. I think you'd be a hit.
You really do.
I do. Now, I am happy to provide, I put the general in general consulting. I am happy to provide you some advice on your profile. I feel like 10 years ago, I was doing the online dating. It's how I met my wonderful now boyfriend.
Right.
Also, boyfriend sounds so ridiculous.
I know.
I'm a 43-year-old woman. I can't say that
Yeah,
anymore.
your
Man
partner.
friend, man
Partner?
friend.
Life partner?
Sure, but
Paramour?
then when you say that, people I think are expecting a woman.
Yeah,
And that's
significant
fine.
other.
That's fine.
Say
because-
go.
Yeah, sure. Man friend.
My
again,
guy.
my
How about that?
My guy.
He's my guy.
I like that.
I saw a picture you posted on Twitter the other day. You guys are so cute together,
Thank you.
too.
And I shout out to him. He is pretty wonderful because this is not an easy.
No.
It's not. I'm gone for great periods.
Did
of
you
time.
meet him on a dating
I
app?
did. I selected him.
You selected him.
And I'm here to
See,
tell
I'm
you.
so insecure, and nobody would want me.
That horseshit, first of all. And we'll get you there. It's like anything else. The more you do, the better you get at it.
Oh boy.
So dip your toe into that water.
All right. Well,
Tara.
I'm going to
It'll be
have
fine.
to consult with you,
Please do.
the general consultant, on that
I am happy to do that.
after hours.
Maybe that'll be my new little cottage industry. Online dating consultant.
See, I wanted to do as my cottage industry, I wanted to be a medical marijuana concierge.
I believe that thing exists. Go to that. Great job.
I don't know that does exist.
Okay. Well, do it.
Like, there's so many products out there. It's very confusing. It's all
is.
self-titrated. It's like patient-directed care. So that's a whole nother conversation
It
for
is.
another day.
Well, I'll come back and we can talk all about that.
Okay, good. Listen, it has been... we can do them all.
Okay, do them all. Can you do them all at like one